cred că o să începem imediat. Mersi. Începem? Perfect. That was basically as much as I could say in Romanian because now I have to switch to English. I hope that's okay with you guys. So first of all, thanks for attending App Insights for any app must-have tool for understanding your customers. Before we head off, let's give a round of applause for our customers and organizers as well. They did a great job putting together this conference. Thank you. Some of you here already know me, some of you don't. For those of you who don't, my name is Alex. I live in Oradea, where I have a company called Ticket Solutions. And among other things, I'm also one of the Azure advisors around the world. And being an Azure advisor basically means that you have close contact with the development teams in Redmond, and you offer them feedback on whatever features and services they're developing within Azure. So on one hand, yes, I do know their roadmap, but on the other hand, no, I cannot tell you anything because I'm under NDA, so I cannot really disclose stuff on their roadmap. I also sometimes write on a magazine called TechWiki, which is created by MSDN, and for one of my latest articles back in January, I was called Azure Guru of the Month. And the funny story about it is that actually the article was about using services such as Netflix or Spotify, which are normally forbidden in Romania by using Azure services. I was surprised to actually get a prize for that because I originally wouldn't think that they would even allow it in the magazine. So that's a huge thing for Microsoft, in my opinion. I'm also one of the contributors for the Azure Search SDK on GitHub and for the other repositories on GitHub for that matter as well. And I'm also a blogger on my own personal website, which is aggregated on community ITCamp as well. So if you want to see whatever I write, or if you want to correct any of my grammar or spelling mistakes or whatever, please go ahead and leave a comment. I'll happily accept it. So that's enough about me. Yeah, it's also my birthday today. So woo! It's probably the best way to start your birthday by giving a session about Azure services at a great conference like ITCamp, at a great audience like you guys. So if you want to have a bottle of water after the session, I'd gladly chat with you. So, okay, enough about me now. During this session, what I actually plan to do is try to point out what the challenges are in terms of building a successful app. I'll try to explain what a successful app means in terms of business value, in terms of application lifecycle and stuff like that. I will also try to point out how slight mistakes you might do or somebody in your team might do will change or will even end the application lifespan. And in the end, I will try to explain how Application Insights fits into the entire picture of application monitoring, usage analytics, and stuff like that. And before I deeply dive into the session, I wanted to start by saying, and by paraphrasing Mr. James Harrington, who said, if you cannot measure something, you cannot really understand it. And if you cannot understand it, you cannot control it. And if you cannot control it, you cannot improve it. Now, I couldn't agree more with that. And the fact is that, just like the slide says, building successful apps is so difficult. It's so damn hard. And the one differentiator between building successful apps and any kind of other production apps you might have is the fact that you have basically 3 pillars, if you want. First, there's a need for speed. Basically, that means that whenever you find out that your users want something, you have to provide them that particular something, whether it's a feature, a service, a new application, an update, or whatever. You have to provide it fast. Otherwise, you will no longer be able to engage with them. You no longer keep them interested. And they will look in a different direction rather than your application. Second, if you do provide them as fast as possible, you still have to further improve your services and your features. If you don't do that, they will not really be interested in your application because they might think about your application that, well, yeah, it does provide some features, but it weren't updated for like 3 years. They won't be interested in it. They will look in a different direction yet again. And then the last thing is continuous delivery. Now, some of your major competitors, they might push updates as often as every single day. And that is a good thing for them and a bad thing for you. Meaning that most of us who are human beings, when they see updates in whether that is the Windows Marketplace, App Store, you name it, Google Play maybe, if they see an update, most of the people, they will automatically do the update to the application and have no idea what has been updated. But the simple fact that there is an update will keep them interested, will keep them engaged. Now, if there's another application which does the similar stuff, they will be more interested in that application which gets more updated than your application. So it's super important for you guys to keep continuous delivery. But the question is, what should you update? Where should you put your more interest in terms of application features? Should it be feature A or should it be feature B? And the fact is that success and building successful apps requires getting the right data out of your users and out of your application. Now, that's sort of theoretical, but I'm sure some of you guys, how many of you are developers? Let's start with that. Okay, a very large majority. I have no idea whether there is anyone who didn't raise their hand. Is there anyone who didn't raise the hand? Okay. Are you at least in DevOps teams? Responsible for operations and stuff like that? Admins. That's very fine. I'm sorry about you guys. Kidding. Now, if you are in development teams, and I'm sure it wasn't your case, but you might have heard colleagues or somebody saying stuff like, hey, I have no idea why this application doesn't work on your computer because it works perfectly fine on mine. You must have done something with it. Or, yet again, there are stories about customers, and you may not have heard about this. Or you may not have customers like this, but you may have heard about the stories, who say, well, your application showed me an error. I don't really remember what the error was, but I clicked OK, it seemed to work, and then it didn't. Yeah, try to get some valuable information from that. I really don't remember what the error was. Super. And then there are stories about people who aren't that, well, let's say in a slight way, in a political way, that they might be frustrated and say things like, your application was failing constantly, so we basically decided not to use it anymore a month ago, so thanks for asking. The fact is that stories like this actually exist because people don't get the right data. Developers who develop applications like this, they don't get the right data. They don't know how the application is performing whilst in the wild. And when I say in the wild, I mean applications which are in the marketplace, which are on the users' mobile phones, on the users' computers, you name it, it doesn't really matter. And the point here is you have to know what your users are doing. You have to monitor them. And you will see that I will end eventually my presentation saying that you have to monitor your users, but in a nice way, not like the NSA does. OK, great. So since you're a developer, guys, were you ever faced with questions like, hey, is my application crashing right now? It is crashing. Why is it crashing? What is the root cause of my application to crash? Or how many users are impacted by the fact that a particular feature from within my application has crashed? If my application is not crashing and is running fine, is it performing smooth enough? Is it loading fast enough? If no, or if yes, what features are my customers mostly using within my application? If a particular application feature is slow, are there many customers using that particular feature? How responsive are my dependency calls? And when I say dependency calls, I mean about those kind of features you're not going to develop by yourself, such as SMTP maybe, or you name it, payment aggregators such as PayU, PayPal. You might have some of those scenarios in your apps. How good is my application user experience? Are my users happy about the fact that I placed a button there and the radio button over there? Is that OK with them? How do I get feedback from my users? These are the kind of questions which, if you can answer, you will be successful in your business, no matter what your application does. It can simply be an iFart or whatever, But if you know your users are happy with the fact that you have an update every single day, and you give them exactly what they want, they will be super happy about it, especially if, if they don't have to pay it. I would argue that most of this talk is based on the fact that modern application lifecycle is something like this. In terms of methodologies, this is basically agile, where in a perfect world, and I have to insist on the word perfect here, a development team eventually will start working on something because they have to work on something, and as soon as they are pushing that particular something to production, in a great world, in the ideal world, an operation team would basically take that particular application, which is already deployed, monitor it, you know about how it works, know whether it is smooth enough for their users, know if it's crashing, and if not, they will add items to the product backlog, which the development teams will yet again take, they will further develop, and so on and so forth. And this basically means that the lifespan of an application should be infinite, in an infinite loop, and it should never end. But the fact is, we don't live in an ideal world. We live in the real world, which isn't that great, because we have challenges, we have blockers. Stuff like, maybe you have more development teams. How do they communicate together? Maybe somebody in one team is sick, and they won't be able to commit to one of the product backlog items they originally committed to. And the other development team will develop some features, which won't really make any sense, because those features won't be updated on time, or won't be released on time. Or maybe development teams, they do work together very well, but they don't really communicate with the operation teams. How do they let the operation teams know, well, we changed the feature, and that is going to change the entire behavior of the application. What should you do next? Or maybe they do communicate well with the operation teams, but maybe the operation teams are lacking the necessary data to monitor the new application behavior. Or if they do have the right data and the right tools, they will possibly or probably lack the action or the knowledge about which actions should we take in order to make the application run smooth enough. Meaning, should we rebuild indexes? Should we delete some files? Should we do stuff like that? And if they know how the application is performing whilst in production, how do they let the development teams yet again know if something should be reiterated, something should be further developed or optimized and stuff like that? And the fact is that there are so many variables here. I've only mentioned a few for the entire infinite loop of the application lifespan to eventually end, to break up somewhere. And the problem is that if one of these variables ever happen, the application lifespan might even end because your customers won't be happy. So the question is, what is Application Insights anyway? How does it fit in with all these questions I've put so far? Now, first, you have to think about Application Insights as a huge infrastructure put together by Microsoft, which is basically transparent to you. You don't really know what's going on underneath some basically calls which you're doing. And because I've mentioned calls, what actually happens, you get from Microsoft a very small agent which you either inject inside your application or which runs alongside with your application. And that agent does nothing else than sends a few probes every now and then, saying how the application is performing, and lots of other data which we'll look at later. And the thing is that, yes, you don't have to worry about things like, hey, is my application running on a mobile device? Is it running on a on-premise server? Is my application a web application which is running on Amazon or on Google, on Azure? Is it running on-premise at the user side? Is it an internet application I don't really have access to? Microsoft doesn't care. As long as they get the right data from the application, which means application usage, application behavior, and we'll look at this kind of information later, they will provide you with all the kinds of data insights you might need to make your application successful. So you get the infrastructure, you get an agent, and then again, you also get a very nicely designed UI, a dashboard within the Azure portal, which will aggregate all the kind of necessary data you need to get from single glimpse very much detailed information about how is my application performing right now. And that's great, because you can even deeply dive inside those charts, and you can see, hey, this request was done now, this request is done later, this request is slow, this request is fast. So let's see what kind of sources do we have. So I have to reiterate the fact that Microsoft does not care where your application is running. It can be as I've mentioned, on Google, it can be on Azure, it can be on Amazon, is the same damn thing in terms of application insights. And yet again, they don't care if it's a web application. It can as well be a desktop application, WinForms, WPF, you name it. It can be a mobile application. It can be a mobile application not written in C#, but rather in Xamarin so not in .NET, rather in Xamarin. It can be an application written in Java for Android, or even in Swift or Objective-C for iOS, or any kind of other application you might have. It can be an application which doesn't even have a UI. It can be a console app. It can be a service web. It can be a Windows service background app if you want. Now, first, what they're going to do, and when I say they, I mean actually Microsoft, they will do outside monitoring, and that basically means availability. They will tell you if your application is running right now or not, meaning that they will do sort of pings, and I have to use quotes here. They will use pings in order to ping a URL which you choose. And based on the response you get, you can condition whether that ping has been successful or not. So for example, if you ping a URL of your choose, if the response is, for example, HTTP status 200, which stands for OK, you will be happy about the fact that the application responded. And that's sort of the basic thing about availability tests. But you can deeply dive inside this. And if, for example, how many of you are using Visual Studio? OK, that was sort of expectable here at ITCamp. So if you're using Visual Studio, you can basically generate and perform application called web test application, which have even the web test extension. And you can upload those web tests as a single unit of testing inside Application Insights. And that basically means that you can test out features within your application, such as search functionalities, for example. So you can have one URL, one request, HTTP request, done at a particular URL to check out whether your search page works. If it works, you can have a second HTTP request, which will input a search query. If that works as well, you can have a third HTTP request, which will sort of click on the first result in the search results page. And if that works, you can have a fourth HTTP request, part of the same web test, which is going to do which might buy the item it has gone into details for. So basically, that's availability test, outside monitoring. Then again, this is in technical terms called synthetic data. Then again, there is real user data. You want to find out what your real users are doing. Are they visiting this page or are they visiting that page? You can do that with Application Insights without writing a single line of damn code. It's so great. I mean, you just put in the agent, and it basically works. And I will use the word automagically a few times here, because it's like magic, seriously. Third, some of you guys, and I have to admit I do it as well, I want to log stuff inside my application. So within a single method, I might have traces, I might call log mechanisms using nlog, log4net, log4j if I would have used Java, for example. You can use all those systems within your application, no matter what your application is written into, and get in a single bucket of the same data inside Application Insights, alongside with the requests, with the page views, with everything else you get from Application Insights, the same information from within your logs. So you don't have to change your code. You don't have to learn anything new. All data gets inside a single bucket of telemetry data. And then again, we will thus know whether the application is available or not, how syntactic data is performing, how users are performing, and what my developer telemetry data is. But I would also like to know what my application behavior is, meaning stuff like, OK, how long did it take for this request to respond to? How many exceptions did I raise? What was the exact exception message? What was the stack trace of the exception message? And you don't have to change your code. You don't have to disable custom errors if you do use custom errors. Everything works out of the box for you guys. And you will get all the information from within an exception you would be normally interested into to find out how you should repair, debug, or whatever your application you should do. And that's also nice and great. You also get things like, hey, if my HTTP request is slow, why is my application request slow? Meaning, if I make, for example, an HTTP call to an external service, how long did it take for the external service to respond to? So for example, if you have an HTTP request which will take a second or so, it might take for the external service to generate a response in 900 milliseconds. So you will know that rather than looking into a large method and try to optimize that, you should focus on the external services calls. Maybe you should phone your provider and tell them, hey, your service is slow. If you don't improve them, and because you don't know the telemetry data of my application, I will look in a different part, in a different direction. And then again, infrastructure performance. So your application may reside on a mobile device, it may reside on a virtual machine, a physical machine, it doesn't really matter. The cool thing is that you will get aggregated data from within the host which hosts your application, meaning you will get in a single bucket of telemetry, requests, page views, and stuff like that, and host machine data, performance collectors as well, such as how high is the CPU, how much memory do I have left, is my application the victim of threat starvation, for example? All that kind of information gets sent out to you in a sort of so-called application insights, which is nothing else than an ID, on simple fact that you have installed an agent. That's so nice. But enough about talking. We'll quickly go through a demo. I mean, quickly is sort of like for the rest period of time here, we're going through a demo. And what I'm going to do now is start up Visual Studio. And yes, I'm using Visual Studio 2015, which is sort of risky right now, even though it's the release client version. But please be aware of the fact that you can also use Visual Studio 2013 for that matter, and get the exact same results as I will. So what I'll do now is create a new web application, and I'm not going to do I'm not going to go with the vNext applications. I'm going to use the normal normal, so to say, ASP.NET applications. And what I want to point out here is the small checkbox. So I basically have the option of saying add application insights to project, which will automatically add for me all the kind of configurations and agents I will require for my application to be monitored by application insights. And of course I want it, so I will check it as soon as I sign in. Which is going to be difficult because I also use MFA. One moment. Happily enough, the internet connection here works great, not because of the hotel, but because I have this. Great. So I will add application insights here. And what I can also do now is either specify one of the application insights resources I have within Azure, or create a new one, like I have the option right here, right now, and just selected in my Dropbox, whatever, drop-down list. So I'll go ahead, create the app. Okay, please don't do that. Oh. Okay, that's way better. So I also select the subscription, which is one thing I forgot to mention. You have to have a subscription, obviously, within Azure. I'll go ahead with the creation of the new project. I will eventually have to specify that this is going to be an MVC project. And what I will also do is specify that I want to host this project, this web project, within Azure as a web app, which is a fancy name for websites, which is the former name of web apps, obviously. So let me go ahead and explain what actually happens right now. What Microsoft will do as soon as I go out of this box here is that they will create, first, on my hard drive, on my laptop hard drive, the entire set of files I will require for this web application, obviously. But they will also create a resource group for web application do, because I didn't specify any other name. And within that resource group, they are going to create, on one hand, the application insights resource, and on the other hand, the web app resource. Do you know what resource groups are? How many of you have ever used resource groups? Okay, great. So you sort of know, but I'll still explain it to you. So back almost a year ago, Microsoft decided that in terms of DevOps, it's not really that interesting for DevOps to use the term of subscriptions in order to define what kind of services you would like to use within Azure. And that basically means that if you have a team of many developers, in order to basically specify and define which developer has access to which services within Azure, you couldn't do that. You had to specify permissions on a subscription basis, which might have been a problem in terms of first customers. If you have many customers, you might want to either segregate them throughout subscriptions, but then again, it will be difficult for your developers to manage those subscriptions. Or you might have a single subscription for all your customers, but then you don't really know when you will see your bill within Azure that, hey, websites has costed you that much. Why did it cost me that much? How much did it take customer A to, how much did my customer A expend? Which were the expenses of my customer B, and so on and so forth. So they came up with the term of resources, and the idea here is that within a hierarchy of a so-called resource group, you can define resources which are nothing else than first services and then service features within Azure. And these resources will uniquely identify within a resource group, based by a name basis and stuff like that, your usage within that resource group. And that basically means that if you have many different customers, you can create, for example, a resource group for each and every single customer. And you will eventually know, hey, customer A has expenses of $100 within Azure, within my subscription of Azure. Customer B has expenses of $50 within my subscription of Azure. You can also do RBAC, which is the fancy name for role-based access control. And role-based access control means that you can define on a resource or a resource group per basis which developers are allowed to do what. They're allowed to read this, they're allowed to write this, and stuff like that. So you get much finer control with a much finer grain within the REM, which is the name for Azure Resource Manager. So what they did transparently to me was to create a resource group and two resources, one for the web app and one for the application insights. I'll skip the portal for the moment. And what I want to point out here is that right now I have this application insights config file, which is basically an XML file with all kinds of modules and stuff like that. And the most important part here is this instrumentation key, which basically uniquely identifies within application insights what the application is. So basically, all the telemetry data I'm going to send out are going to be sent out with this instrumentation key. And this also means that if you have multiple applications, you can mix all the data from all the applications within a single dashboard in Azure Portal. Great. So I didn't write any single line of code now, did I? I will start the application. I will debug it. And what I want to point out here, I'll make this window fairly small, because I don't really care about the UI, fancy UI the template has. What you will see here is this notification toast, which says your first application insights events have been sent. So basically, just by me starting the application, I already get some telemetry data out of the web app. And the cool thing is, if you let me do a few clicks here. I will go to the About page. I'll go to the Contact page. OK, that's enough. I will pause this for a moment. OK, close. I will pause this for a moment. What you will see in the output window is that Application Insights has already started sending out information in a JSON-ish manner. I mean, it's a JSON, all right, which has all kinds of different properties you probably won't understand at the first. I didn't at least at the first. Things like, what kind of event is this? So it's a request. When was the request generated? What's the user ID, which is a very cool thing. So I can, using Application Insights, uniquely identify the users without having any kind of database of users. But I still know which user has done what, because they're generating some cookies, they're doing all kinds of strange things over there. I know when the user account was acquisitioned, basically created. I know what the session ID is, meaning that if I have one user doing stuff on my web app, I can know within a single bucket of telemetry data what were the steps he took within my application. which basically means that I can mentally reproduce all the steps it did inside the application, and I can thus retry to generate the error he generated. So there are no more phone calls such as, okay, did you go through that? What did you do next? What did you do before that? Are you sure you didn't do that? Because you will know that kind of information by a fact within the dashboard. So what I could do next, and I will stop this application, what I could do next is go into the web application dashboard, Web Insights dashboard, and I will already see here, as soon as the dashboard loads, I will see here all the requests I did within that new created web app, and you see here the web application 2 as a proof of that matter. So a few minutes ago, boom, I had some requests, 8 requests for that matter. My average response time was 400 milliseconds. I had page loads here for around 300 milliseconds, and I can deeply dive inside the requests and say, okay, what was the performance collector response? What were the page views which were generated? What were the requests themselves? And I can do all kinds of fancy things here. I can, for example, go inside one of the requests, and I will see the most common data I might be interested in. But then again, there is this very small button here, which you press, you will see things like what was the operating system the application was running on, and you can also see the operating system of your browsers based on the HTTP header you get. You can see what was the browser used throughout this session, what was the browser version, where did the request originate from? So it was from Europe, from Romania. What device did the user use? What network type was it? I mean, all kinds of things you might be interested in order to try to replicate the steps they were taking. There's a question here.
Where are these data stored?
So the question was, where is this data stored? I have to paraphrase due to the recording. I hope that's okay with you. So basically, this data is collected by the agent, the Application Insights agent, and they're going to store it transparently inside their own Azure storage tables, Azure storage blobs, and stuff like that. They're going eventually to do some sort of data mining and get out some aggregates for you for the dashboard.
Okay, I have the possibility to export this kind of data to make a custom query.
So the question was whether there's a possibility to export this kind of information, and you can absolutely do that. But you will get the raw kind of information. So you won't be able to export, for example, the dashboard, which might not make any sense. I mean, you cannot export the chart itself. But you are able right now to export it. And the cool thing is that you can also make a continuous export, which basically means that you're going to define a destination for your data, and they, for themselves, without impacting the performance or stuff like that, will automatically export the data from Application Insights into your own container if you want. Great. So basically, this was it about Application Insights and the first steps within App Insights. What I will do next, I will use NuGet to add one of the NuGet packages I like the most, and that is Application Insights, tracing something. Let's wait for NuGet to return those responses. And you can see here, I have a NuGet package for JavaScript, applets, agents, and you also have one for log4net, you have one for log4j. Right now, I'm looking for a NuGet package which will add a trace listener and a few modules so that I can basically get my system tracing data out of Application Insights, out of my application into Application Insights. For whatever reason, it takes a while. Until then, I will copy this snippet here, and I will explain it in a minute, and paste it in my home controller. There we go. There are a few errors here I should take care of. And I think we're all set now. So basically what I did change was I changed the About page right now. And what I'm doing right here, I'm calling an HTTP, I'm doing an HTTP request by creating an HTTP web request, actually, and I'm sending out my IP address, which in turn will respond with the city my IP address originated from by using this ipinfo.io web service, web API. And there's a helper method here, and this helper method will do nothing else than basically actually create a particular web request. In the contact page, I have, for that matter, a call to a website, but that's a different story. So, trying to open up this web page. Come on. Any moment now. Yeah, one thing to mention here. It should have been an IPv4 address. I should have configured my NIC in order to make this properly testable. But instead, what I'll do, I'll publish the application. Before doing that, I also wanted to quickly add the trace listener NuGet package. Install. It should install any minute. There we go. I totally accept everything. Wonderful. So let's publish this app. This is going to be a fairly straightforward process, which is going to do web deploy within Azure, and I will basically have this application on one of the Azure data centers. I think I've selected North Europe, if I do remember correctly. Okay, there it goes. Now, one of the things I did not mention, though, is that if I, for example, run the application, within that JSON, you will see a few properties, and one of those is developer mode. Developer mode basically means that, where is it? Developer mode, true. Developer mode basically means that whenever I create a new event, whether that's a trace, a page view, it doesn't really matter, I will get the data automatically within the same second put out inside Application Insights. But in production apps, you might not be interested in doing that. So what they're doing underneath is they're batching multiple requests they will do through Application Insights into batches of, I think, 30 seconds or so. And if I, for example, go to the About page, I will see my IP address, which cannot be, for whatever reason, from Vodafone hotspots be resolved. But I will use one of my Azure virtual machines, and now I get an American IP address, and it says that I'm from Radvent. That would have been nice. Okay, why I did that was because I want to show you that within the Azure portal, I should normally get right now information about both my traces and the requests I did after I put the application into production. So basically, developer mode is automatically disabled when your application is in release. Let's go to the search blade. And boom, there it is. IP address from Radvent. And this is basically the trace I did in code here. Cool, isn't it? Now, I showed you a web app, but let's try to monitor a console app as well. So what I'll do now is create a new Windows console application. Wonderful, and I have a snippet for that as well, which is this one. But before we go ahead, just to prove myself that I didn't actually, I think I did something wrong here. Yeah, I created a class. Just to prove myself that I'm not making any kind of sorcery, because I know it looks like magic, I will create a new application insights inside the portal, a new application insights resource inside the portal. And that's fairly straightforward. So you go to developer services, you go to application insights, you give in a name, whatever, doesn't really matter. You will specify what the application type is. And as I've said, you have options such as web apps, Windows Phone apps, Windows Store apps, Java apps, iOS apps, Android apps, and other apps, which is anything else. So, resource group, I will create a new resource group, which I will name, okay. There it goes. Fancy resource group. Super. So, I will have to select the subscription as well. I'll go with this one. And Central US is basically the single location you can use right now for application insights. App insights, console app, wonderful. I will not pin it. And it's creating. Now it will take a while for this to be created. For whatever reason, NuGet isn't really cooperating. I might drop this test for a few minutes until the resource is created. And let's at least activate Application Insights. And what I'll do here is basically add the core API, because the way the SDK is created by the Microsoft teams is that they have a core SDK, and as a wrapper around the core SDK, you have log SDKs, such as the log4net, log4j, and log trace listener NuGet packages. And then again, you have the usage analytics, which is wrapping everything together. So I'll only add the core SDK here. And yet again, I'm going to accept everything. I think I'm all set now. No, not yet. OK, I will wait for everything to be installed. The resource is already created. That's nice. And I will copy the resource key, which should be somewhere around here at all settings. Maybe not. Instrumentation key, there it is. And I will paste this instrumentation key over here. Did it not yet install? No, it's still installing. OK, I will drop this for a moment. And what I'd like to do next is go to the dashboard, the web portal yet again, to one of the resources I've already created a few days ago, because I wanted to show you how an application insights data might look when the application is in production. So inside the ITCamp 2015 resource group, I have one of the application insights resources named ITCamp Demo 1. And you can see you basically don't have to have the same name within your application and your application insights resource, because the application itself is called something different. I think it's called C++ or something like that. Yeah, because we all like C++. So what I see here is the average server response time over a period of, right now, 24 hours. I also see the number of server requests which were done over the last 24 hours. And I see a few, OK, maybe not a few, but quite a lot of server requests which failed. And if I go to failed requests, what I can do here is basically find out which requests were not working. And I can see that basically the largest majority of them is a single request at the contact page. And very nicely, I can also see the exceptions which are thrown when where my users were trying to do that request. And obviously, all of the requests have the same root cause. And that is, so 19 users were impacted. That is a system component namespace exception of type Win32, which actually stands for System Data SQL Exception. And what I have here is the exception message, which says a network-related or instance-specific error occurred, blah, 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 blah. But this usually stands for the fact that my users and my application backend couldn't open up the TDS endpoint, which basically means that I either messed up the database name, the TDS endpoint name, or maybe there's a port which we didn't use, or maybe there's a firewall configuration error. And that's a cool thing, because right now, without unconfiguring or disabling custom errors, without writing any single line of code, I got this exception message from within my application, and I know if I would like, I could even go inside the entire stack trace here. And I can uncheck just my code to see the complete set of calls which are done underneath my database opening. And if we look at the application, which I fairly obviously already had opened, I will go to the home controller, the about page, and ta-da! Basically, the error is that I used the wrong name. So rather than using ITCamp 2015 DB, rather than using, ITCamp 2015, I used something which had DB as a suffix. And one of the even cooler things here is that I can go inside this chart, and I can group all the aggregated data I get here. And I could, for example, say, hey, group the data you have by application version. So I will see that all the exceptions were generated by application version 3.0. And doesn't really matter what the minor version was. But it was application version 3.0 which generated the error. And that's interesting, because on the other hand, going to server requests on the main page here, I can see that I still had successful requests at the contact page. So the question is, when did this error appear? Is it a version-specific error? And I can go inside this web request information, detail information, whatever, and you can obviously see that the error code is 200 rather than 500 or whatever it would have been. And I can go into even more details and see what version did actually succeed in generating or responding to this request. And what I'll do here is the same grouping as before. And ta-da! I see that most of the requests were on version 2.0 rather than 3.0. And I have a few which were on 3.0 as well. That's some magic I did yesterday, which I shouldn't have done. But anyway, you get a point, right? You can basically see the application version which generates few errors after the application has been updated. And what I did here in terms of my minor version was to basically generate star versioning. You're familiar with star versioning, right? You can basically, inside Visual Studio, specify at the properties page inside assembly a star here. And it will generate for you the minor version rather than have you manually insert what the version number is. And that's great, because each and every single build you will do will have a new version automatically. Great. So, going even further, what I could also do is, let me run this application for a minute. You will see that my application JSON files are being sent out here. On the small display, everything works. OK, there we go. So I will now look at the new requests which were generated after I go to the About page. And what I wanted to show you here is that going into performance, for example, or no, let's instead go to server requests first. So if I look into my About page requests, I will see, let's first restore this displayed. Great. I will see that at each and every single request I did, and this was like a few seconds ago, there are a number of data I get from the request itself, but I can also go to something which is called related items. And it's so nice, because for a single request, so I have to iterate this, for a single request here, and which already gives me lots of data, I can see all the telemetry for that single session. So I can basically see that that request, OK, this is not the best example, but I will look for one quickly enough. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Sorry for that. That was Bootstrap, I think, wasn't it? It should have been this one. Yeah, it's still under preview. Okay, this one. I think I was off a few seconds because this one is fresher. Show me telemetry for this request. Great. So for a single request, I get all the data I could collect, and I mean telemetry data, such as what was the dependency, what were the traces, and what was the request itself you did. So I can basically mentally replay all the steps which are generated because I have all the kind of information the user did within a single request itself. So I get traces, I get dependencies, I could get page views or custom events. And custom events is also a nice thing. And so let me actually properly introduce this application. This is an application which is sort of a to-do item thing, which you can use to add to-do items. I have to stop my demo soon enough. So I will go ahead, I'll create this item. I can also email stuff such as what was the I can also email stuff such as the to-do items I have. Ignore the delete here, that's an error. So I can send myself an email using SendGrid with that particular item. And if I go into Application Insights yet again and look at server requests, email, where is it? Post, email. That should come up any minute. I see the post here. I think this is the correct one, which took roughly 1 second and a half, and which has telemetry data specified such as, hey, what was the request which was realized? And I created something which is called a custom event. And looking at the code, a custom event actually is nothing more than a call to Application Insights. So going to the email with post method, it's this. So I can basically specify both properties, such as what is the item name and measurement data. And you can basically aggregate stuff like, if your application, for example, sells tickets, like my company does, what you could do is specify custom events which will aggregate the name of the event your tickets were sold to, the prices or the profit margin you get from selling those tickets, and you can see in a nicely designed chart on a time-based time lapse what was the based income in what day and what period and stuff like that. So looking at this custom event here, I see all the properties I have defined, such as what was the day, and 5 stands for Friday, what was the item itself, and it was item 1, which I pressed on to email. And you get all this kind of information within a single bucket of telemetry data. You don't really have to do lots of coding for that. For example, the custom event I have sent was 2 lines of code, and that was it. So I only have like 5 minutes left or so. And before I'll end my presentation, I wanted to yet again tell you that using Application Insights, you get a 360 view of both performance, usage analytics, and application availability. You get super fast and powerful data insights, that's marketing, and you get all the information within a single dashboard and within a single view, so to say. Yeah, Microsoft loves the open source SDKs and stuff like that. So you have SDKs for Java, for Ruby, for iOS, for Python if you want. Are there any Python developers here? Okay, so you get the SDK as well, which is obviously for free. You get logging frameworks for Log4Net and Log, system diagnostics, LogJ, you name it. Okay, we still have 5 minutes left for questions. Sure, there's a question here, then another one over there.
Okay. Do you have the possibility to collect the data for multiple silos? For example, I have an application that are running on 3 jumps from a machine to another during a session, and I want to trace that user from first page to last page, and also to collect the data and to make a report.
So the question was whether you can collect data from multiple silos, and that's a fairly obvious question in terms of cloud development, for example, where you have multiple instances running in parallel, and you want to get traces of data for all the kinds of requests which are done, no matter what the server was, because at a second request, there might be a different server which responds to the request. And the question is yes. What you would have to change, though, is the session ID. So you would have to have your own business logic approach to using a different session ID. So rather than letting Application Insights generate a session ID based on a cookie for each and every single request, if you have multiple requests which you want to aggregate and put together, you would generate a session ID first, and then when the service, the operation, the process has been completed, you would create a new session ID for that particular individual guy. And it doesn't really matter how many servers you have. Basically, as long as they all have the same kind of application code base, they will all have agents, the same agents from within Application Insights. And you will get inside the same bucket of data, inside the same telemetry data, no matter what the requests were. But you will be able to group all those requests by session. And inside the search style I showed you earlier, you can search based on the session ID. And you can see all the different data you collected for that request, whether that is requests, whether that is page views, whether it is traces, whether it is SQL dependencies and stuff like that. And I did not show you, but for example, in SQL dependencies, right now you can have HTTP requests, dependencies, or SQL dependencies. Within SQL dependencies, you can go so far that you can even see the SQL request which was done on the TDS endpoint. And you can see the exact request, I mean, select, star, from, person, customer, whatever. There was another question over there. So the question was whether it is possible to use Application Insights into already running application. Let's name it like that. And your example was C++. Yes, you can absolutely and totally do that. Because as I've mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, you can either inject the agent or you can run it alongside with your application, which will basically mean that you will have an executable file, which will act as an agent and as an actor, as a monitor, to monitor either IIS, if it's a web application, or to monitor any kinds of telemetry your application generates by using the logging frameworks. And you will also get, if it's a virtual machine or stuff like that, for example, your application runs on, you will also get performance collectors, CPU, memory, thread starvation, and so on and so forth. You don't get the entire set, obviously, because some of the data was generated by code, and if you don't rewrite your application, you can't get the data, obviously. But you will get a fair amount of data just by installing the agent. Does that respond to your question?
Yeah.
Great.
On the underlying technology,
No, it's not IntelliTrace. IntelliTrace is a totally different thing. For those of you who don't have Ultimate subscription, IntelliTrace is a technology from Microsoft, which you can use from within Visual Studio to basically see all the steps which were generated in terms of methods called. But this is totally different than that. Yeah.
I have the possibility in the dashboard to customize a flow. For example, I want to know how many users hit the page coming from other page.
Yeah, you can basically see aggregated data in terms of response times, in terms of requests by numbers, and you can even see inside the charts data collected in different time regions and time periods. So maybe I don't want to see data from the last 24 hours, but maybe I want to see from a particular time slot. You can do that. Great, thanks. There's another question there. Okay, so this is basically a question on performance. What about performance when you use Application Insights? And the one thing I would mention here is that yes, if you use a mobile device, you will use some hardware resources because otherwise it wouldn't work. But think of it like this. In terms of web applications, for example, The way Microsoft has designed Application Insights is not to impact performance in terms of CPU, memory, and so on. So they won't look at how much CPU does my Application Insights resource use. Instead, the target is, if your application right now without Application Insights has, for example, 100 requests per second, using Application Insights, their target is that you still get at least 99 requests per second. So it doesn't really matter if it's using 100 CPU or not. As long as you get the same performance you did, maybe with a very slight difference. Rather than 100 requests per second, you get 99 RPS. Great. Thanks.
Sorry, another question. Can you share some events like when a silo is too full to open another virtual machine to
Actually, I would like to, so the question was, if there happens with one of the silos, can Application Insights take actions upon those events, like alerts? On one hand, you have alerts. So that's what I basically wanted to mention. And alerts right now mean that you can either send an email or you can do HTTP requests. They're still iterating and working throughout this, but there was a slide I would have had in terms of pricing, but I'm completely done, so I'll only take a question or so after I say this. In terms of pricing, Application Insights has 3 tiers. One of them is completely free, the second one is called standard or something like this, and the last one is premium. And the big differentiator between these pricing tiers is the fact that for the free tier, you only get 7 days of detailed data and 13 months of aggregated data. Whilst for the other, you get, I think, unlimited time or something like that. But the thing they're trying to do, so besides pricing, why you would use Application Insights is because on a long-term basis, what they would like to do is go so far that you could take actions when alerts happen, or you could, for example, if you see you have a SQL dependency which is slow, you could drill into that SQL dependency and even see the execution plan which ran on the SQL server or SQL database for that matter. So you won't get any kind of technology like this by using New Relic or CloudMonix or Azure Watch, which are still super tools to use, but they basically don't have the resources Microsoft has. Any other questions? Sure, there's one, and last one over there.
you can export all the information of data
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft Insights to your custom database, let's say. Can you define the way the information is stored on my custom database?
What do you mean by way?
I mean, let's say I already have in place some sort of application that interprets.
Right. So right now, when you're going to, the question was when you export data, can you manipulate it in any way, right? So basically, right now, you're only going to export raw data. I have no idea, and I actually might sort of make a notch here because I'm not recording making a notch. They will eventually have something like fine graining of the data which gets exported. And you could also do the implementation of your own telemetry context, which means that rather than have the agent push everything up to the cloud, you can select the kind of data you want. So you can implement, for example, sampling, which means rather than get all the requests, you only get 10% of the requests and stuff like that, because statistically that's correct. Thanks. Last question? So in terms of privacy, does the user have any control in what data gets exported? The fair and short answer would be no, because the user only knows about this. The long answer would be you could implement your own technology, and like I've mentioned about the telemetry context you could implement, you could specify if my user doesn't want that and that and that and that, you simply don't send it because you write your own code and your own logic on what data gets sent out. So there are solutions to this. I did say at the beginning that I want to end out with saying it's super important if you want to be successful to monitor your users, but don't do it like NSA. Let your users know that you're monitoring them and engage with users. Tell them you know what features aren't working. Tell them you want to gather feedback, and by using Application Insights, you will gather feedback. Okay, thanks a lot.